Hello. So I will be reading a Living History Day. This one's a little long compared to the other ones, but it's a short story. So a new project. My problem began the day of the first snowstorm. Miss Parker was doing her best to get her class under control. Still, it was the first snowfall of the year, and we were all acting pretty immature. Girls and boys, please, I'd like to discuss an upcoming project with you. Miss Parker, Sally Schlutz called from the back. Can't we go outside and catch snowflakes for just a few minutes? Sally could barely contain her glee. You should think she had a ride here from Polynesian Island. Sally, Miss Parker said, if you'll let me explain about this new project, I guarantee it will be just as exciting as that new snow out there. We all turned away from the window, sitting quietly in our seats. We waited skeptically for Miss Parker to continue. After all, what could be more fun than a good old-fashioned snowball fight? Thank you, Miss Parker said in her kind, patient voice. The project is called Living History Day, and the idea is for each of you to become someone who has made a significant contribution to our country's history. You can bring in costumes and props, and we'll invite the whole school and all your parents and friends. They'll have an opportunity to talk to each of you about your historical contributions. At the end of the day, a panel of judges will decide which of you best portrayed a distinguished American. Here's a picture of Miss Parker and her class. And then the snow fall in the windows. It seemed as if 25 hands shot up at the same time. Miss Parker ignored them all and continued to speak. For this project to be a success, you should think carefully about the person you want to portray. Try to select someone who made a significant contribution to our country. Then find out as much as you can about that person. That way you'll know just what to say when one of our guests asks you a tough question. Wow, Vinnie Simone yelled. That will be so much fun. Can I be Babe Ruth? He's my hero. Rodney Frankel said, Can I be Elvis Presley? I know all his songs by heart. Miss Parker raised her right eyebrow. Since we all know what that means, the room suddenly became very quiet. Thank you, Miss Parker said. And here's everyone with their hands raised up for questions. Then Miss Parker continued with her explanation. Let me reinforce that you should select someone who really made a difference in the history of our country. I can't stress this enough. She glanced toward Rodney and Vinny, and then she swept her eyes around the whole class. Don't make a hasty choice, she said. I want you to think about this assignment for a few days before you make your decision. Remember, you're going to spend several weeks studying this person. That is why it is so important that you choose your person carefully. Okay, Rodney said, sighing. His sigh could be heard throughout the room. Maybe I won't be Elvis after all. How about Mickey Mantle or Wilt Chamberlain? Miss Parker looked at him and shook her head slightly. I thought I saw a smile working at the corners of her mouth. And here's... Then everyone's hands shot up again. There are so many great people, Zoe asked. How do we get about choosing? Had Zoe read my mind? That's a superb question, Miss Parker said. There are literally thousands of people you could choose. You might choose someone who's alive today, or you might choose someone who lived 200 years ago. Here's a suggestion. What period of history do you like best? If you like the colonial period, then choose someone who lived then. I don't want to be misleading, continued Miss Parker. You can choose whomever you'd find fascinating to study. Here are the only requirements. Miss Parker began to write on the board. And this is her writing on the board all her instructions. When she was finished, she said, That's it, boys and girls. Why don't you take a few minutes to sit quietly and think about this project? The big decision. Over the next few days, the classroom was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was so hard at work that Miss Parker rarely had to raise her voice above a whisper. As for me, I was hopelessly stuck. I just couldn't decide which remarkable American I should portray. 1 minute I was going to be Louis Armstrong, but 10 minutes later I imagined myself as President Eisenhower. By the next morning I would wake up and decide that I just had to be E.B. White. Yet that night by dinner time I had already gone through Alexander Graham Bell, Charlie Chaplin, and Yogi Berra. At dinner on Wednesday, I explained the problem to my family. My mother said, "Well, you spend hundreds of hours on the computer. How about portraying Bill Gates?" "Thanks, Mom." My father said, "You love to eat chocolate. What about Milton Hershey, the man who created the chocolate bar?" "Thanks, Dad." My younger sister Leslie said, "You love to go to amusement parks. What about the person who invented the roller coaster?" Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. I even looked up the term roller coaster in an online encyclopedia to see if I could find the name of its inventor. Here's a little drawing of a roller coaster and a chocolate bar. By Thursday, the assignment had me totally paralyzed. I made list after list of possible choices. I made one list of my favorite authors and another list of my favorite presidents. On Wednesday night, I was sure it was going to be Davy Crockett. I listed all the neat things he had done and why he was the perfect choice. After all, he had been a frontier hero, a pioneer, and a famous politician. The next morning, I woke up remembering that I had a dream about Teddy Roosevelt. He was a soldier, a president, a boxer, and a hunter. He even had the teddy bear named after him. Every time I thought I had made up my mind, another remarkable American popped up. Class time was pure torture. Everyone was hard at work learning about his or her person. And here's a little computer probably to show how he was looking up encyclopedias about the different people that he wanted to do. There were biographies and articles scattered all over the room. The sign-up sheets for the 2 classroom computers were filled with famous names. How should I sign up? I am confused. By Friday, I was in such a panic that I was too embarrassed to even ask Miss Parker for help. At one point, she passed my desk and spotted me reading a magazine article about Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect. He was one of my father's helpful suggestions. Miss Parker said, "Peter, I didn't know you had chosen Frank Lloyd Wright. He would be a fascinating person to study, but don't I have you listed as Davy Crockett?" "I'm just not sure," I said. "Is it too late to change my mind?" "Well," Miss Parker looked at me kindly and said, "Monday is the deadline. Can I help you make your decision?" "Thanks, but no problem," I said hopefully. "I'll know for sure by Monday." Just then the bell rang and I hurried out of the class. At home, I collapsed onto the living room couch. What was I going to do? At that precise moment, I glanced across the room at the framed photograph of my great-great-grandfather, and my eyes looked into his eyes. I'm not kidding about this. I felt that he was trying to communicate something to me. Then I knew exactly who I was going to be on Living History Day. I felt indebted forever to a man I had never met. Final presentations. All the invitations had been sent. We were busy transforming the school gym into the Living History Museum. I was painting an enormous mural of mountain scene. Alex Lucas was at the desk next to mine. As he walked by my desk, Alex, who was going to be Thomas Jefferson, looked into my duffel bag and said, "Hey Peter, what's with the train tracks? Who did you finally decide to be, a train conductor?" He made a noise like a train whistle and started to laugh. Here's a picture of the invitations and a picture of them working on their murals. Alexis Cara, who was going to be Betsy Ross, was busy painting an American flag on a giant sheet of cardboard. At the sound of the laughter, she looked up and said, "Hey Peter, this is supposed to be a serious project. Who said you could bring in your favorite toys? Who are you going to be, Santa Claus?" I was too busy painting my mountain to be distracted, and since I had started late, I had a lot to get done in a short amount of time. At lunchtime, my dad brought in a large piece of plywood on which I had painted a rural scene. Miss Parker helped us push 4 desks together and laid the plywood on top of the desks. I started to place the train tracks on this sheet of plywood. "Hey Peter," said Ben Dazzy, "what's with the train tracks? Who did you ever decide to be?" "I'm going to be Meriwether Lewis, the famous explorer. Want to take me for a train ride?" He snickered as he walked away. Living History Day. The big day was finally here. The transformation of the gym was complete. Tables and chairs were set up along the walls, and behind each table a large display board had been hung. No one would ever have believed that this well-organized space was usually the setting for wild and noisy games for basketball. Just before noon, we all hurried to get into our costumes and scrambled to get to our tables. At exactly 1 o'clock, the gym doors were opened and a horde of students, parents, and other visitors rushed in. I'm not kidding about this. You could see the utter amazement on everyone's faces. You could practically hear the group's wow as people looked around. Dressed in our costumes, surrounded by our props, each remarkable American was seated next to his or her special display. "This is terrific," I heard one parent saying to another. "I don't know which one of these amazing people to talk to first. Look, there's Ben Franklin next to Dr. Martin Luther King. There's Susan B. Anthony sitting next to Dr. Jonas Salk. Where should we begin?" I was too busy to notice where the judges were. People of all ages were crowded around my display, looking at the trains as they whisked along the tracks and asking me a million questions. The next thing I knew, the three judges had wandered over to our side of the gymnasium. One sixth-grade teacher named Mr. Kaplan had started a conversation with Juan Ramirez, dressed in an old-fashioned suit. Juan was spending the afternoon as the African-American composer Scott Joplin. His display included a miniature piano and a tape recorder that was playing Scott Joplin's jaunty ragtime music. And here's him with the tiny piano. "Mr. Joplin, I just love your music," said Mr. Kaplan. "Which of your compositions is your favorite?" "Thanks for a question that doesn't stump me," Juan replied. "Maple Leaf Rag is my favorite. It's also one of my best known." Still, the truth is that I didn't gain real recognition until after my death. In 1976, I won a Pulitzer Prize. "Thanks for sharing that fascinating information," Mr. Kaplan said as he waved goodbye and wandered over to the photographer Dorothea Lange. Abigail Feisten was Dorothea Lange for the afternoon. She had a camera around her neck and a display of her documentary photographs. Mr. Kaplan studied the photos carefully before he began to speak. Meanwhile, I could hear Miss Lampert, another judge, talking to Bernie Peterson. As Cesar Chavez, he was explaining when he had begun to organize the migrant workers in California. Next to him were Zoe Johnstone as Susan B. Anthony, the famous women's suffrage leader, and Jimmy Martinez as Francis Scott Key, the lawyer who wrote the lyrics for our national anthem. At another table, Emma and Chloe Fast, our class twins, were dramatizing a pair of remarkable women, Helen Keller and her tutor and interpreter, Anne Sullivan. The day went by in a flash. Suddenly, Miss Parker stepped up to a makeshift podium and said, "Thank you all for coming. We hope all of you have had as much fun and learned as much as we have. There's just one last thing to be done before we bring this fascinating afternoon to a close." Before I knew what was happening, all three judges were standing next to my table. Mr. Kaplan taped an award onto my display and said, "Peter, you have accomplished something very important today. You have taught us that it is not just famous Americans who have made significant contributions to our history. You have reminded us that without the hard work of each and every American, our great country would not be what it is today. Thank you, Peter." Everyone around me was applauding. I could see tears on my mother's face and joy in my father's eyes. And here they are with the train tracks and a little bit of musical notes. Have you already figured out the identity of my remarkable American? If you have, congratulations. If you haven't, here's how I introduced him to my visitors. My name is Peter Chen. I was born in 1845 in a small village in northern China. Despite my parents' plea, I decided to leave China and seek my freedom in a new and different place. I had no money. The only way I could get to America was to sign a contract forcing me to work for 4 years in exchange for wages and free passage on a ship. After a long, hard voyage, we came ashore in San Francisco, California. The year was 1965. I didn't speak one word of English. I was immediately transported into the countryside where I was given a sledgehammer and told to get to work. Mile by mile, driving spike after spike into the steel rails, I helped build the first transcontinental railroad in the United States. I hammered my way into American history. The history of our country was changed forever by the sweat and toil of laborers like me. When you talk about our country's history, please don't forget about people like us. Oh, by the way, do you know the thoughtful, intelligent boy in your class with the name exactly like mine? He happens to be my great-great-grandson. That's the end. So some questions you can ask yourself. So why was Peter so indecisive about picking who he wanted to do for this project of his? And what is the theme of the story? And why do you think that is the theme? They'll give different reasons. Write them all down. Write down everything you remember from the story, or you can tell someone what you remember from the story. And then pick one character from a different story that you've read and try to compare and contrast that character to Peter from this story. So everything that they do the same and all the things that they do differently. Thank you.